Okay, we gotta go. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll give the floor immediately to Professor Andrea Simoncini from University of Florence, which is a beautiful city, not as beautiful as Padova, but still a beautiful city. And is one of the most prominent constitutional law professors who investigate the relationship between legal algorithm in society and the legal society, how law and more precisely the constitution interplay and are affected by the development of the algorithmic intelligence. So I'll give the floor to him, and as usual, we have a lot of time for discussion. Thank you so much for being here, Andrea. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for this applause. I hope to be at the, to maintain the promise that is inside of this applause. So, thank you, first of all, and well, my presentation, my talk is about the unconstitutional algorithm. And my idea is to start with some, let's say, alarming, breaking news from yesterday. Probably you all saw this, that the Meng Wanzhou, the daughter of the owner of Huawei, has been arrested in Canada on an order by the United States, and now is going to be extradited to United States. Why I'd like to start with this news, and which is the connection with the topic I'd like to address today. Some data, I don't know if you are familiar with those. This is the situation of the top 20 worldwide internet leaders companies 5 years ago. You can find 2 from China, Tencent and Baidu, were among the 20 top players in this field. This is today. You have 11, Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu, Xiaomi, Didi, and whatever. So China is performing a huge amount of investment on the field of artificial intelligence. And this triggered a real trade war. But some other data could be interesting. For example, this is the rate of first university, let's say Triennale University, in China in natural science engineering during the last around 10 years. Still, this is, probably you cannot see it, this is EU rate. So we are still, as Europeans, higher than Chinese and Americans in terms of doctoral on those issues. But China overcome and surpassed also the United States. And this is another interesting data. This is the answer of how willing are you to sell your data for money or for other benefits on the internet? And this is China, 38%. This is United States. We, Italy, are quite willing also to send out our data, probably because we don't know even that we are selling our data. But the 38% of China internet users is quite a good amount of people. So the question is that US reacted. This is June 2018, is White House Office of Trade and Manufacturing policy from Trump, how China's economic aggression threatens the technologies and intellectual property of the United States and the world. This is the opening, this is the opening statement. Chinese government is implementing a comprehensive long-term industrial strategy to ensure its global dominance. Beijing's ultimate goal is for domestic companies to replace foreign companies as designers and manufacturers of key technology and products, first at home, then abroad. So the idea is that China is enlarging his space in artificial intelligence mainly, but on technology, generally speaking. And so this is, I found this, so I put the two things in connection because it's of yesterday, the news about the arrest of the daughter of Wang Wanzhou. And I found this little paragraph on Huawei. Huawei has partnered with the University of California, Berkeley on research focusing on artificial intelligence and related areas such as deep learning, reinforcement learning, machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, so all the things that Lamberto is working on probably. So pay attention because the United States is watching you. Areas in which all have important future military applications. This is the key point. So that technologies that China is investing are the same ones that we expected will be foundational to the future innovation of the US. Artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, augmented reality, robotics, blockchain. Moreover, this is the point, there are some of the same technologies of the interest of the US Defense Department. And I think that this is the last one, is of October 10th. Huawei announced 2 AI chips that they discovered, or let's say built, and that made them able, mainly in the 5G environment, to be leaders on this. So the fact that the United States arrested the CFO of Huawei, saying that probably the reason is that they are violating the embargo against Iran. This is clearly a false accusation. The real point is this. Artificial intelligence is something linked to power, that is to military power. So this is my thesis. We are at the outset of an entirely new era for legal systems, especially for constitutional law. Because of the rise of artificial intelligence, a sort of new sovereign power is rising. And this is an issue that is inevitably linked to our interests, our sense, meaning constitutional lawyers. Because what is constitutional law? Broadly, very broadly speaking, I don't know if how many of you have a legal background? Some of them, just a few. So generally speaking, constitutional law is that part of the legal system that tries to tame the power, that tries to delimit the power in order to protect freedoms. Is the part of the, let's say, of the legal limitations that mainly are focused on power. Considering power the possibility of one person or one subject to produce in a unilateral way some effects in the sphere of another without the consent of the other. So if I have the possibility, the capacity of producing some effect in your sphere, this is a power, this is a potence. But as you know, we in Italian, we have this distinction between power, potere, potenza. We have the same in French, pouvoir, puissance, but not in the American language, we have power. Potence is probably only used by physicists or people that are, the potence is some kind of measure in your field, but not exactly the same point. So we can, we have this distinction. So if constitutional law is this, very, very quickly, we had 2 waves of modern constitutionalism. The first one was the wave that was opened by the 2 great revolutions, the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And the limitless power, the sovereign, that the original constitutional law wanted to delimit, to measure, to put a limitation toward, was the king. So it was a private force, was the owner of the military army, was the material and physical force of the king. And the tool that we invented somehow was the law. Equality, liberty, fraternity, equality, the 3 the slogans of the French Revolution, or the Constitution of the United States. So the sovereign was the private force of the law, the tool was the law. But the second wave, that is the post-World War II constitutional law, was paradoxically against the instrument that we invented trying to delimit the power, because we discovered with totalitarianism that was the law the enemy. Through some laws, we decided that Jews have no rights. A state was able to build things like Auschwitz or Dachau. So we invented the second constitutionalism, that is the rigid constitutionalism. That means that we have a super law, that is the present day situation. Constitution, Italian constitution is a law with superpowers, let's say, okay? So it's a super law that has the possibility of also delimiting regular laws. It's more important, is major, so if a law goes against the constitution, as you know, we have the Constitutional Court, and then we can cancel this law. So if those are the two, very quickly, obviously, the two first wave, my point is, are we in front of a sort of third constitutional wave in which a new kind of limitless power is arising? And how constitutional freedoms, that is, those values that we try to defend, to protect, to conserve through the Constitution, how those freedoms can be protected against the rise of this new king, of this new sovereign. So my lecture will be divided in those 4 parts. I'm not sure to do everything, and be sure that I try to be quite quick, not so. So the first point, I try to outline this new sovereign. Which are the main features, the main characteristics of this new limitless power that I call, in a little vintage way, cybernetic power. The second is the impact of this power on the constitutional law. And the third one is the new challenges to constitutional law. And specifically, I try to answer this question: is the new European regulation about the GDPR, that you know is quite an important piece of regulation, is it really effectively able to cope with this, to tackle those kind of new challenges? And the final question, how constitutional law will survive, if? And so, let's start. First part, the new sovereign. On this, I would like to start. I apologize with people that already had, as Elisa heard this. I found, studying this question, a lot of what I called unheard prophets. I was amazed, shocked by how many people during the end of 60s started to warn against the possibility that technology would would make a sort of hostile takeover in front of democracy. At a certain point, we forgot them, and now the question is again out. But, for example, this is Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse wrote One-Dimensional Man, that was sort of libretto rosso of the 68, you know, the movement of 68, the movement of 68. The movement of 68 has in this very inspirational book one of the most important, let's say, trigger. And I am really fascinated by the first page. Now I show you some lines from the first page of One-Dimensional Man. A comfortable, smooth, reasonable, democratic unfreedom will prevails in advanced industrial civilization as a token of technical progress. Indeed, what could be more rational than the suppression of individuality in the mechanization of socially necessary but painful performances? So the question is still necessary freedom if some machines can do all the painful performances, all the work, all the hard work? And here is the genius. This technological order also involves a political and intellectual coordination. So the idea is that this is not simply a change in the technological world, in the industrial world. It's something that inevitably brings with it, will import, let's say, a sort of new political order. To the degree to which freedom from want, the freedom from the need, the freedom from the necessity of having things. The concrete substance of all freedom is becoming a real possibility. So if the idea that machines can provide for everything for us, the liberties that are linked to a lower productivity, they are losing their initial content. Freedom of information. Today, you can click on the internet. You have any piece of information you want. It was a very old thing when you had only newspaper, printed paper newspapers. You had a very limited resource of assets to have freedom that you need that freedom. But today, those freedoms probably are. So the last sentence is really, let's say, scary. In this respect, it seems to make little difference whether the increasing satisfaction of needs is accomplished by an authoritarian or non-authoritarian system. So if I have whatever I want, what's the matter if it's a totalitarian regime or a democratic regime? As far as I have whatever I want. So conclusion, a society increasingly dependent on automated, mechanized processes to provide goods and services creates a practical addiction to those machines. Therefore, whoever has the power of creating and governing those machines will govern the society. This is the theme. This is the issue. So if you create a system that is able to provide you a lot of things that you need or you are induced to think that you need, but this is the same at the end for the person. Obviously, so my point is this is the conclusion of Marcuse in 1964. Is this a dystopian perspective, as all the movies that you can see today, from Ready Player One to all the Divergent series things, or to Broken Mirror, or whatever you want, Black Mirror. Is this a dystopian perspective? Is it science fiction? This is, for me, very important. I don't know, are you familiar with that book? Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? So people that knows what I'm saying is people that is a step forward in this question. So this is the original from which Ridley Scott took Blade Runner. But it was written, look, in 1968 by Philip K. Dick, a genius. He died practically poor, totally poor, but the son, his children, having the rights of this book, because you can imagine Blade Runner was one of the greatest success on the history of movies, they became rich, while the father, and the point of that book and of the movie is, do you remember the story? So man created replicants that are artificial intelligence, we would say, and robotics together, in order to do the slave work on outer space colonies. And at a certain point, because they reached the point to have a conscience, they rebelled against the man. So artificial intelligence was created only as a servant of the man. Take this in your head, because we will go back on this in a strictly legal and juridical issue on this. So artificial intelligence has to serve the man, not to substitute it. But remember the story, that the hunter of replicants, he fell in love with the very beautiful, with what we don't know exactly what she was. Yes, okay, there is this open-ended story. But the question is this, that we risk to fall in love with those algorithms because of their beauty or practical force. But let's go. So it's not science fiction, it's science. And this is the other unheard prophets I'd like to talk about for. This is, I think, probably you very well know him, is Norbert Wiener, 1948, is the first one to use the word cybernetics. He wrote this seminal book, Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. I could stay with you for 1 hour about Wiener, but obviously is not the topic of our but is another very interesting guy. He was in the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton together, people like Einstein, von Neumann, Hilbert, Gödel, so a little bunch of pretty brilliant kids. And so the main theory of this book is communication and control systems in human beings and machines are the same. So his intuition, his idea, is that the way through which the biological organisms work, that is stimulation, command, action, feedback, is the same of a machine, okay? So he, trying to find out a good word to label this new kind of science, he invented cybernetics from the Greek, the old Greek Kybernetis techne. Kybernetics techne means the art of the helmsman, of the pilot. Kybernetis was the pilot of the ship, okay? It's the art to govern. And the interesting thing is that Latin, you know that Latin, we as Latin, we have the copyright of law. We invented law. I mean, all the system. Greeks, they have something like, but we were the first with Roman law to systematize this idea and to provide a job to me and Andrea and the others. So, and Latin's, the translation of Kubernetes is gubernum, that is the government. So there is this sort of original point in common between cybernetics and the art, so the art of governing machines and individuals and the art of governing collective bodies. So my point is that cybernetics is not only the origin of ICT, so the sequence, web, Internet of Things, big data, and as you well know, but also is at the very root of neurosciences. That is the study of brain or cognitive activity as biochemical reactions, so translatable to algorithms. And genomics, you know, the genome project that was started in 1980 and finished in 2010. So the idea of decrypting all the human genome. And so we can, you know, the CRISPR technique, so the possibility of editing and whatever. So which are the two main common features, common ideas, course ideas of those cybernetics? The first is an epistemic premise that I call reductionist, that we can try to synthesize in this way. All complex problems, intelligence included, can be reduced to a limited order of simpler questions. So this is this is the epistemological premise of cybernetics. Everything is complex, can be split in a series, definite, finite number of discrete operations, okay, of finite operations, simpler than the complex one, obviously. We lawyers are expert in making a complex, take a complex question and subdivide it in more complex questions. But this is our specialty, is not of engineers or people like them. So, is what I call algorithmic reasoning. And the second, so I think that was the combination between this epistemic premise, so we can solve all the problems of you consider mathematicians here, Bertrand Russell idea of having a universal principles of all the logic, this huge project that all the reasoning, all kinds of reasoning can be translated in logic problems and then mathematized, okay? Except for Gödel, that with his theorem said, no, man, at least one problem, you cannot solve it. But technological question is, we invented machines governed by those kind of algorithms, able to perform a kind of computational operations at a never heard before speed, okay? So the combination of two created from cybernetics, ICT, neurosciences, and genomics. This is my idea. So Second point, what all this have to do with constitutional law? Try to be very synthetic. All this evolution put in crisis one of our legal dogmatic premise, the dogma of the distinction between means and end. In our constitutional theory, here we have important constitutional scholars, they can discuss this, but the constitutional mindset is somehow based on this distinction. The distinction between the aim that I want to reach and the means that I have to use, the instruments to reach that aim. And the legal responsibility is always linked not to the instrument. So you cannot say that a car is the responsible of the death of a man if the car technically hurted the man and produced the death. Obviously, it's the man that drove the car that is responsible. You cannot consider responsible the stick for the wound that I give you if I hurt you, okay? But in times of self-driven car or automated car, these problems start to be more complicated. And, okay, on all this, we can find some proxies, okay? We can find the responsibility not of the person that guided the vehicle, because no one guided, but of the fabric, of the industry, the corporation that made the car. So we can invent something. But here, the problem is deeper. Because usually means are elements that in the causation of an event have no discretion. They cannot choose. A means is something that is used, that not uses things. So the question is this, my point, that the real crisis of this evolution, of this paradigm shift, Samir can explain better this, but is that we were used to think that technology belongs to the world of means, of instruments, so that we decide what to do and technology operates. But the question is that today, technology is not only a tool to carry out previously taken decisions, but it takes decisions. So the question is that we are deferring to technology the decision, and this put in crisis all the system. We are more and more asking technological devices, algorithms, systems, machines, whatever, to evaluate, to decide, not simply to do what we have already evaluated and decided. So this is the point. How does, and this is the second, let's say, turning point in my lecture. So, sorry. So, how? So the question is, given that there is this shift in the use of technology, we are increasingly relying on technology, asking it to take decision, not simply to do what we want to do, okay? But this happens in two different ways. The first one is direct and visible. We increasingly ask explicitly technology to do things on our behalf. And I will give you, and I will focus in my presentation mainly on this, giving you two examples of two algorithms used to take decisions and all the problem, okay? So I will focus my presentation on A, but B is probably even more important, and I can't tackle this question today. That is, technology affects, determines, compels our decisions, not simply because openly we ask it to take this decision, but because it provides us knowledge to take our free decisions. So we take knowledge from technology to take our decisions, not understanding or thinking that probably that knowledge is not so neutral or not so impartial. So I would like simply to make some notes on the B point. Today, the channel through which we get information on the world is monopolized by technological platforms. If you ask yourself, how do you get information on everything? On a recipe, on the street you have to take, on how many people is on the traffic, on the weather, on how much it costs something or whatever, but also on politics. On until this is a problem of commerce, you can say. But information on politics, information on economical questions, on finance, which is the channel? Google, I mean, this is, generally speaking, research engines, or social media, or, in this order, the websites of news corporations, but all through technological platforms. So the question is that these platforms, social media and the search engines mainly, have grown exponentially because there was this narrative that internet somehow represented a disintermediation from the knowledge. So everyone can have access to knowledge. Everyone can become a knowledge provider. I can post my photo on things. I can become a journalist every day and whatever. Without thinking that behind this, there is a very, very restricted body of 4 or 5 huge tech companies that are able to collect, to gather those information, to elaborate them, and to re-give them back in a certain order. WikiLeaks, Cambridge Analytics, you know, very well-known things. So here, we have another way through which technology is practically affecting our way of behaving. And this is probably even more dangerous than the other one that I'm going to explain now. But against this, I think that it is probably the more dangerous part of our problem. I think that we still have very, very few means or tools in order to protect. I simply cite and quote the last of this was a very interesting, because we all on this issue, how to use social media in order to manipulate a certain political result. We always use Cambridge Analytica, but there was a much higher problem and more dangerous problem by Myanmar, in which the government, I don't know if you follow this question, was a very good, it was on New York Times. New York Times discovered this, that Myanmar military government created tons of fake Facebook account, triggering in the population a hate movement against Muslims there because of the Hindu government, that they want to provoke, to trigger a reaction, and so making a lot of totally fake things about little kids raped by Muslims and so on and so on. And they triggered a mass, a genocide, mass revolution that collective killings of Muslim people, everything organized through a certain use of fake accounts of Facebook. And Facebook simply said, okay, yes, we have to monitor a little bit more our policy on fake accounts and whatever. But going on our case, so how we use technology in order to take decisions. This is the first case. It's very famous, for at least for someone. Is the so-called Compass case. Eric Loomis, convicted for attempting to free a police officer, so he didn't stop to the policeman. he was sentenced to 6 years of imprisonment. It is quite a long time of jail for not stopping at the police. We know that the United States is not exactly like here, but also there. It was Wisconsin, not Alabama. So this is the case. This is the point. This is a part of the decision, of the sentence. You means Eric, you're identified through the COMPASS assessment as an individual who is at high risk to the community. Your history on supervision and risk assessment tools that have been utilized suggest that you are extremely high risk of reoffend. Then a judge, for the first time, utilized an algorithm in order to decide the amount of the sentence, of the jail period, okay? What is COMPASS? What is this software? COMPASS stands for Correctional Offender Management Profiling. So it's a way to profile. You know, I imagine very well the question of profiling. What is profiling? To use a huge amount of data on you in order to forecast your future behavior. This is one of the most delicate, profiling is one of the most delicate points on big data and machine learning and whatever. Future behavior at work, for example, your future behavior as a consumer. This was the first original idea, okay? You, Amazon Classic, you buy 3 books about Tolkien, the 4th is about Tolkien, okay? Or if you can go to Narnia, or you can move to this kind. So we discovered the existence of predictive algorithms through the suggestions of Amazon. That is a way of profiling. But here the profiling was used in order to determine the sanctions. And this is the page today. You can go. Equivant is the new name. The original was North Point. Was changed because it's booming in the stock exchange. And it's clear, it's a decisional support for judicial officers to make the most informed decision possible. You depend on having up-to-date information about cases, people, events, obligation, activities. This means capturing, okay, and we give everything to you, to the judge. But how they succeeded in doing this? Obviously, you need data, as all the computer scientists here. In order to make an algorithm, you need data. So they made an agreement with the state, with this county, Eau Claire County in Wisconsin. So for 3 years or 4 years, I didn't remember, they had all the data about crime rates. Because in order to make a predictive algorithm, you need data on previous. And they started to submit to the people this questionnaire, okay? It's amazing. In the United States, if you are arrested, the first thing is that you have to fill a questionnaire about question like, what do you do? I mean, when you were young, what was your attitude? Were you a violent kid or not violent? And the fantastic thing is that you find people that in the United States, I was violent. That is, you know, they are naive. So they are, okay, yes, I was really violent. And okay, these are all the, let's say, the classification, the labels that this program at the end finds. And so at the end, you are labeled with a certain score of risk. High risk, very high risk, medium level, rare. No, sorry, this is, okay, low risk and no risk. So, put in your shoes in the Eric Loomis lawyer's. So put your feet in Eric Loomis lawyer's shoes. This is really, this is good. I'm streaming, right? That's also in the United States, they will be happy for this way of. So, they have a sentence, they have a sanction, 6 years, and the reason, the motivation is this algorithm. So the least that you can do as a lawyer is to ask to see the algorithm. Please let me see how this algorithm was made, what is inside, how were weighted the different things, the gender, the precedence, the questionnaire, the sex, the gender. They had a specific point on this. So they said that this decision violates the defendant's right to the due process. This is a very important constitutional clause in the United States for 10th Amendment. So the due process, it violates the defendant's right to be sentenced based upon accurate information. We have no clear information on which basis. What is the motivation of this? How does the algorithm reason? This is important in order for the lawyers. The Supreme Court, nothing to do. They rejected the appeal, saying that if used properly, a circuit court's consideration of compass risk assessment at sentencing does not violate the rights. Why? We determined that because the circuit court explained that its consideration of the compass risk scores was supported by other independent factors. So the question is, the decision didn't rely solely on the basis of the algorithm. So the judge took into account the algorithm, but also other factors. So as far as is not the only reason of the decision, you are allowed to do this, okay? This was the defensive strategy of the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. So as far as the algorithmic decision is not only doesn't substitute totally the decision, but is a part of the decision, it's okay. And pay attention, because this is very important. And so compass is merely one tool, okay, not the only tool. And there is another point that says the court. Compass is a software that is intellectual property of the company, so you have no right to open it because it's protected by intellectual property. Is a way for Equivant and North Pointy to make money. If we make public the algorithm, every kind of judge, every kind of lawyer, everyone can make those predictions. So, you are not able to open up the algorithm. But this is compensated by the first point. But as far as is not only the only question, it's okay. It's clear for you? Makes sense? So, you cannot open up the algorithm, but you cannot decide only on the basis of the algorithm. So, you can use it as other factors, okay? Second case, administrative decision making. This is an Italian case, also probably very funny. Someone of you probably heard about this. Is the Buona Scuola, you know, the reform of school teaching in Italy. Was a huge reform, and so the ministry, because they have a huge number of applicants, a huge number of winners, and they have to decide where to assign the people according to their preferences, but also to the free room spaces in the regions and the order of the results. So, because it was too complicated, they decided to ask HPS services to make an algorithm. Okay, and you know how the story ended with people from Sicily that was assigned to Brunico, and they said, "Why? We don't know the language and whatever." Also here, probably there was some problem in the assignment. A school teacher trade union asked more or less the same thing that in Lumi's case. So they asked to have access to the algorithm of the ministry to understand why this professor, this teacher from Calabria was assigned to Campione d'Italia. Okay. The defensive line of the ministry refused to disclose the algorithm, saying, first, because it's an algorithm, is not an administrative document. You have right, this is a very important law, 241 of 90 is the law on the administrative proceedings, and Article 22 provides for a right to access to administrative documents. But the question is that an algorithm is not a document, is not is a code that is on a physical support, but cannot coincide with the physical. So tries, this very, very weak way of trying to defend themselves. So algorithms are not documents, are not administrative procedures. And secondly, same issue of Loomis, because it's under the copyright protection. So they went to the TAR Lazio Sezione Terza Bis, that is the one specialized on public instruction. And here we have our decision. That is quite an interesting decision. So first of all, it's clear. The TAR said, this is il TAR, not the TAR. Il TAR said, obviously, the algorithm is the administrative documents because was the reason that decided to assign the man or the woman to that place. So if a citizen has the right to have access to the act, administrative act that had something to do with his freedom, obviously the act was the algorithm. So question closed. The algorithm was totally accessible. And it's interesting because this fact that the sentence says, the fact that the language of the algorithm is not comprehensible for the public officer as the private citizen is not a problem because there are professionals that can explain to you the algorithms. I said, because one line of the defense of the ministry was, okay, I can also show you the source code of the algorithm, but you cannot understand nothing. What do you want to see? And the judges said, okay, I take a consultant that is an expert in programming and coding. He will explain to me the question. So algorithms are administrative actions. This is very important. This is an obiter dictum that, obiter dictum was something that the court said that had no real impact on the decision. Was a sort of, okay, detto per dire, during, but it was very important. The court said, and by the way, here we were able to use the algorithm only because we had no discretionary act to take. So here the assignment had no discretion. It was only a very complicated formula, so you have to take into account different things. But the administration, as soon as they weighted all the things that they have to take into consideration, there can be only one possible solution. It was very similar to a mathematical formula. It is complicated, but there is no, the algorithm didn't take any kind of decision choosing from this and this on his own reasoning. He simply made a very much complicated calculus. But the result could be only one. So the idea is, if the algorithm would be used to take a discretionary decision, not a mandatory decision, that is a decision that is already decided, probably cannot be used. So you cannot use the algorithm when you have to choose and to weight different things, but only when you have to make a calculus. It's okay? And more important, because of the application of the law 241, the right to access can trump copyright. So the AKPE cannot say we cannot show. So these are two cases in which technology took decisions directly on behalf of humans, decisions that affected deeply the freedoms of people. The first case was jail sentencing, here the assignment of your working seat. So do we have an effective legal frame in order to consider those automated decision making? And my point is the new GDPR, so the new General Data Protection Regulation of United States of European Union, could be a good framework to face those kind of issues. So when a decision is taken by a machine on you, and this decision has effects on you. This new regulation put two totally new fundamental rights on algorithmic decision. The first one, the right to be informed and to have access to the existence of automated decision making, including profiling, in those cases, at least to receive meaningful information about the logic involved. So the first right that is created by the GDPR is the right to information. Everyone has to know if there is, in this moment, a sort of machine, an algorithm that is using his own data in an automated way, and that this machine can take important, relevant decisions affecting himself or herself. Okay? Has the right to know this, and there's also the right to have access to this, and, this is interesting, has the right to receive meaningful information about the logic involved. So not simply you have the right to know that there is an algorithm that is processing my data and it is taking decisions about me, but you have also the right to have some information about the logic. The second, much more important, you have the right not to be subject to a decision based solely, uniquely, on an automated processing, including profiling. So if you want, the Loomis case and the Tarlazio case doctrine, idea. Okay, if there is an automated decision, this decision cannot be the only decision. I mean, there must be, as I will say, a human in the loop, as the coders and programmers has used to name this. So some consideration. The first is the right to be informed. This is interesting. This is the statement of the Association for Computing Machinery of the United States. They made a sort of charter, 10 points for programmers, statement on algorithmic transparency and accountability. So they are the coders, they are programmers. And they said that systems and institutions that use algorithmic decision-making are encouraged to produce explanations regarding both the procedures. Because here the problem is that as soon as I know that there is an algorithm that is deciding about me, the problem for me is trying to understand its logic. Otherwise, to know simply that there is this machine has no value for me. The value is to understand following which kind of reasoning is taking those decisions. This is very interesting. 2 days ago, Council of Europe adopts first European ethical charter on the use of artificial intelligence in judicial systems. And by the way, we are, as University of Florence, involved in this charter. This is the CEPE. So if a judge wants to use an algorithm to make a risk assessment or to make whatever kind of evaluation, principle of transparency, impartiality, and fairness, making data processing methods accessible and understandable, also authorizing external audits. So this is an important principle. Objections. This principle presupposes that algorithms, they always have a certain logic. So you can have access to the logic of an algorithm only insofar as it has a logic, humanly comprehensible logic. So the question is, but here is what I'm trying to learn from Samir and from the others with them I'm working with. Here the problem is that deep learning or neural networks feed-based algorithms, very often, they use a logic that is not predetermined by the programmer. So they find somehow the logic from the data. And this is not always humanly comprehensible. So in a lot of cases, we can have an algorithm highly effective, so highly capable of predicting things, but whose logic or its logic is not necessarily comprehensible for the programmer himself, even himself. So the question is, how can I legally challenge an act which have no understandable motivation, but it is highly effective? So what's happened? What's the story of the right to the logic if you have an algorithm that creates the logic from the data through the neural process that Samir can explain, but at the end of the day, has no necessary, in certain cases you can understand it, but not necessarily. Second right, the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on this issue, on this principle, everybody agrees. But still, I have some doubts about this. So this principle is what is called the human in the loop, or high ETL processing. So a model that requires, at a certain point, human interaction, okay? So if you put a human in the loop, you stay okay. So you have the certainty that the algorithm doesn't take, is alone the decision. There is a man that can check. Objections. First, probatio diabolica. Can you imagine the judge of Wisconsin that condemned Eric Loomis has just to say, okay, I see the algorithm, and I think that the algorithm is good. And I think also on the basis of other things that the algorithm is good. So it's extremely easy to say that my decision is not based solely on the algorithm. If you have not a high scrutiny of reasonableness or proportionality here, if you are not highly scrutinizing this, it's extremely easy for everyone to say, okay, I had the algorithm, and also on the basis of my knowledge, I decide what the algorithm told. I agree with the algorithm, and it's extremely easy. But the second point is what I call the practical force of algorithm. Algorithm provides for a default option. Algorithm provides a motivation. So you have no burden of motivate yourself. And motivation is a work, is a job. You have to take into account things. So consider a judge that has, our judge is Italian. They have usually on their table, they have this kind of caseload. And they have to decide 20 cases. And the algorithm says this, what they choose at the end. Are they really able to say, no, okay, this is the algorithm, but I want to take other things? There is a practical force, nudging force. When you have in an app the default option and the other where you have to explain. Okay, you choose 70%. Probably you are brilliant, so you are always people that not choose the default option, but 60% of people choose the default option. And the last point is that algorithms, they have this idea to be scientific, neutral, evidence-based. And this is my last point, the unconstitutional algorithm. Even though, let's consider, for example, that we respect the first principle. So we know about the existence of an algorithm and about its structure. And that this algorithm wasn't the unique base of a decision. Can it happen that an algorithm is genetically unconstitutional? So, per se, is not constitutional. And we have to go back to Compass case. Because right after Compass case, there was a huge debate in the United States because someone started to check Compass case predictions. So a group of people, of independent people that they were around ProPublica, that is a good website that makes this kind of journalism, they start to say, but those algorithms tends to be biased against blacks. And so what they did, I mean, they tried to open up the black box. There is a very famous book in the United States, The Black Box Society, written by Frank Pasquale on this, and this is the word. A group of experts choose a group of 10,000 criminal defendants in another county, and what they did, they applied Compass, so they labeled the risk, and they followed for 2 years what really happened. And they discovered that in a lot of cases, the predictions, for example, when the algorithm said that he is a high risk of reoffending or very low risk of reoffending, that there were a lot of errors in those forecasting, in those predictions. Obviously, not huge error, because I don't remember, Samir, the error was around 30%. So for 70%, it was accurate. So it's a very good result. But we, as constitutional lawyers, we have to look on those 30% that is mistaken. And how is it mistaken? This is interesting. Look at those, this very, let's say, comfortable guy, you can see directly from the face, Vernon Prater, was classified low risk, 3. That girl, Brisha Borden, high risk, 8. In the 2 years after, Brisha didn't do anything. Actually, she went to Harvard University. And Vernon Prater, 2 rapes. He immediately went after for very bad reasons. He went in jail immediately after. Oh, this one, also this Dylan is not. Okay, Dylan, low risk 3. Bernard, high risk 10. They both smoked marijuana. And again, Dylan Fugett was rated low risk. He was arrested 3 times after this, in 2 years after. So which was the problem? The problem was, trying to be really concise because I think I finished all my time. The errors, in the error, the algorithm tended to overestimate the high risk of black people and underestimate the low risk of white people. And this because, but here I think that Samir, this is from a paper that is going to be published with me and Samir. A critical aspect in using neural networks or other types of automatic learning is bias, is the question of biased algorithms. The term bias in the field of AI is used to refer to information systems that systematically and unjustly discriminate against certain individuals or groups in favor of others. It's very easy. If you take the prisoners, the prisons population in the United States, more than 80% are black people, Afro-Americans and Hispanic. So if you create an algorithm that has to forecast the probability of incarceration of future, is obvious. Somehow is intrinsically necessary that you overestimate the risk of black people and underestimate the white people. Because for white people in the United States, it's very difficult to go in jail. And this is not because of the nature, but it's because of society. It's because a lot of also bad things that happened. And the risk is that you internalize all those bad things in the algorithm. Hume in late 17th century made a very harsh attack against natural law. That Andrea is a high expert on this. And his main attack was about the naturalistic fallacy of natural law, saying that natural law fails when it makes a essere e dover essere. A being, a be, it ought to be. When you transform something that is in something that must be, you make an error, you make a mistake. And this is the same mistake. How can we survive? I'm also from, my field of study is also linked to environmental law, or environmental right. So my idea is precautionary constitution. This is more or less a slogan, I know. Also a little bit fashion, but you know, in order to publish, you have to do also this. So precautionary constitutionalism, what can mean? So we are in a situation in which we are not certain that some kind of technologies are surely and in any case harmful for man. We have no certainty of this. But this element of uncertainty cannot be used as a reason not to regulate the phenomenon. I don't know if it's clear, but this is the precautionary principle. If you are in a condition of scientific uncertainty, not certainty, uncertainty, and all this field, all the field of artificial intelligence is dominated by this, because we are in the situation in which we really don't know exactly what we can do with these things. So this cannot be used as a good reason to say, okay, let's go, and we will see. This is exactly the same reasoning against ozone, dioxide, and whatever in environmental law issues, and I think that also in technology, we need a huge consensus on this. So today we are at the dawn of a new kind of cybernetic power able to affect human freedom, and based on this computational power. There is an exceptional concentration of the economic players holding this power. 5, only 5. And it's interesting, only last thing. Yesterday, Microsoft, for the first time since 2000, he became the first company for market capitalization in the stock exchange, in NASDAQ. It was since Bill Clinton that Microsoft was one of the, the 5 was the FANG. Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google are the, now you know, 70% of NASDAQ. And Microsoft is not there anymore, but it went there. Why? Because of clouding, and because of the problems of Google and Facebook on regulation. So my point is that there is an exceptional, a legal framework aiming to the protection of fundamental values can be enforced only internalizing those values directly within the education. So the reason of this kind of masters, the reason of this kind of education, putting together lawyers and technical people, people that works with data and people that works with law. This is the only possibility, internalizing those values before. So from protection by design to protection by education. This is the real me.
Thank you, Andrea. Very provocative, as usual. Questions? We'll take questions then. You scare them off, probably. You have a question?
Hello. Thank you, first of all.
Yeah.
So I subscribe to this idea. I'm not a lawyer person. I'm the technical person.
Yeah.
So I understand that we are trying to make law proactive rather than reactive in these issues. But I think this is very hard to achieve completely. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts on what the technologists can do to be better, to not end up in situations where we are creating systems that are, yes, they have a negative impact on society, I guess, in general.
This is, what do you want to do? We put together some questions and then, or
We can collect more questions.
I take some notes.
Let's see. You have a question.
Give me 1 second, because my dementia is gone. I have no paper. So, okay, I remember the question. So.
Okay. I don't know if this is actually a question or a consideration. In my understanding, you assume that people like judges, they are just in a certain sense. So that their decisions are unbiased and that they can explain their decision. But I think that for a human being, it's actually very difficult to explain the reasoning why he got an answer a priori. A posteriori, maybe yes. Then you decide, and then you look, find some motivations for your decision, but your decision was not made. There is.
You're right. Sorry, what's your name? Niccolo. And the previous one? Really? As me. Wow. You are from Germany? Serbia. Because I am Andrea too, so you know. Yeah, a lot of Andreas here.
Hello.
Multi-gender.
Is it an idea to like put a regulation on the input of the algorithms? Like I say, my algorithms decided upon gender, I don't know, age or something like that. Can't the law remove or allow only algorithms that don't consider, for example, features that are racist, for example, or gender biased, something like that?
Your name?
More? Okay, I'll ask one more question because it's very interesting to me. So you are worrying about the ramifications of adopting algorithm-based processes, and you've drawn examples mainly from what we call public law. So that's something that you cannot do when you sentence somebody. There's something that you cannot do while deciding whether a teacher from Calabria should go somewhere else. But think of the market, okay? Think of the private sector. And in the private sector, I assume that CEOs will be called out if they don't process decisions on the basis of algorithms. Why didn't you follow Google that said this? Why didn't you follow this software that was saying that? So don't you see that there's a potential disconnection between judicial decisions and public law and private practices and the market? Anybody else? Floor is yours, Andrea. Thank you.
So, may I? Other questions? No, okay, I go. All interesting questions. So, starting from Andrea, and how to internalize in the, let's say, technical. So, first of all, I think that we are living a season of our civilization in which this distinction between technology and humanity, between hard sciences, soft sciences, I think is quite outdated. So my perception is that after a long period of segregation, now, as in Alabama until '69, so if you are a technician, you have to stay there on your data, in your laboratory. If you are a human, you study humanities, you have to be on the society. I think that there is a sort of convergence of this. So a new kind of convergence. So a lot of people in our field is clearly becoming aware that without having a real dialogue, so let's see in a little what we did, I think is the first article written by someone from physics, someone from legal studies. But I think it's inevitable in this field, because without understanding what's really going on within the technical, because technology is a language as law. Technology is a way of seeing reality. So if it doesn't intervene in the very first moment in which you are trying to see reality, immediately after, it's too late. I'll give you an example. Now, for example, and so I join your question somehow to Vincenzo's question. It's clear that now the real business on which we would like to work if we can. The real business is how to make algorithms fair. Okay? Also the great corporations, the over-the-tops, so Google, I mean, the big five and whatever, they are all working on this. How can we find a way to ensure people that the algorithms that are processing their own data, they are fair, they are not biased, they are not gender-oriented, no? If you start writing on Google, I didn't remember the phrase do you know the problems that Google has when they complete the sentence? That there was, I don't know, I didn't remember the question. It was, if you put black man, I think that's something immediately was violent, something like this, or black woman robbery, so things like that. And so everyone, and immediately there was huge reactions. Or, for example, the question of advertisement on YouTube, that is governed by an algorithm. So at a certain point, Toyota had the news that his spot, his clip was streamed immediately before some videos of haters, of anti-Jews people, crazy people, but because they were very clicked by people that could buy a Toyota for some certain kind of reason, I don't know why. So Toyota clip was immediately before a video in which it said we have to kill all the Jews in the world, something like that. So immediately Toyota said, Google, that is YouTube, we take back our money for advertising. So immediately the reaction of Google and YouTube would say, okay, we have to immediately make all the YouTubers polite. And so we used the sort of filtering within Google, creating a huge problem also of freedom of speech, of freedom also of enterprise, because a lot of YouTubers are enterprises now. So the question is that now the great business is how to regulate this, the data setting, I mean the input data. How can we do this? We don't know exactly. And so my first point is that the real way is that this, let's say, requirement that we have to use non-biased data in order to do fair algorithms has to be taught directly in the university to people that works on this field, okay? You cannot simply teach how to make a good code or how to make a good use of data. You have to also to teach that you have to put yourself the question, which kind of, the GIGO, I mean, garbage in, garbage out. So if you put garbage in your algorithm, in your feeding, you have garbage out. So at the end, for example, there is also a market sanction, because for Equivant, now there are some problems, because as soon as everyone discovered that they were biased against black people, they start to have problems in selling their products. So my first point is that we need to internalize humanity's dignity, fundamental values within the technological issue. I was trying to give you this example. I'm the president of the ethical committee of the pediatric hospital in Florence, Meyer Hospital. So we have a lot of bioethical issues. I work with doctors, okay, nurses, and people that work with disabilities or illness of kids, okay? So now, with technology that can let a little baby or very little kid survive for years in situation that simply 3 years ago they were simply dead after 2 weeks. So we can keep them alive for a long time. So they put a lot of very complicated and tough bioethical questions. But we have doctors that in the medical science curriculum, they have no teaching at all of bioethics, not one course. Or in the specialization of pediatrics, we have no teaching at all. So as soon as they are there, they are totally outplaced So they don't know how to do. So I think it could be difficult, is a sort of cultural revolution, but we have to work on this. I mean, on this internalization. Coming to your question, is really difficult. We are trying to work. Who discovered this win the Nobel Prize and a lot of money on this. The point is that, for example, Google, the strategy of Google is, okay, we make the algorithms, and then we create an ethical committee that will check the algorithms. And by the way, the Italian representative of Google, that I know him, said, Andrea, why don't you want to join us in this committee of algorithm? And I said, okay, it could be interesting in terms of money. I think that probably they want me to but this is not, for me, is not the best way. I mean, to create a next post committee that has to, because as soon as you have the algorithm, is very, okay, and it's very difficult that it is not diffused or that you can stop it with an ex post evaluation. So the question is how to build the constitutional machine. That is the algorithm that controls the algorithms and checks and this is the machine that will substitute our work totally. The constitutional machine makes me and Andrea Pin totally jobless because they can make this check. But the question is that how to regulate the data sets. This is not easy. Obviously, you can put some questions, you can put some regulations. You can work with the societies of physicists or computer scientists, but clearly is the input phase under the focus. Yeah?
Okay, so basically it's I would like to add a short comment and also I'd like to try to add another small question that is related, because I think that I definitely agree that, how to say, that the main point, I definitely agree with your view about this shift in the way, for example, our sciences, social sciences now are somehow closer than a few years ago. And I think that this is the real answer to a lot of the questions that are underlying all the things that has been asked. And from that point of view, I will say also that I'm optimistic because I have a lot of other experiences, like, for example, at Stanford, there is now a new center that is called Human-Inspired AI Center, where the goal is exactly this one, to put together people from law, AI, neuroscience, all together trying to solve this same task, because obviously there are a lot of questions that are related and you need people from different point of view to solve it. So I think I'm optimistic from that point of view. And I will say that, but going to the data set, I think that actually there are two problems. And I think that now we are only focusing on one on them. So in my last talk, I had some examples that were related to this. For example, the fact that you have gender bias, or the fact that you have algorithms that are like the example that you have with Compass. If you are a black guy, probably your face is going to be recognized with less precision than a white guy. This is an easy problem, because now there are a lot of people that are trying to regulate how data sets are collected. So this is basically, I think, something that is going to be solved soon. And there is a lot of awareness now on that. So I think things are rapidly changing on this side. So from that point of view, I think that is not a huge problem. But I think that, and this is the question that I want to add on the plate, is that there is one part of the problem that is we need to have better data sets, fair data set, as you were saying. But even to responsibility, that in all the things that you described, this unconstitutional algorithm, or the fact that you have automated decision-making software, especially the machine learning-based one, that are the 99% of the things that you are talking about now, The problem is that even if you have a way to represent the decision that you are doing, there is another guy in the plate that is in terms of responsibility. That is not I'm Google, I'm Tesla. I have a super good autonomous driving system. But the problem is not only that the decision now, the responsibility is not on the people, the person that is using the tool, and so this is moved to the people that build the system that is able to go autonomously. But you have another level that is that this system has been trained on data that somehow are making the decision. So there is the system, the machine, the algorithm that is the set of rules that somehow are responsible for the decision. But there are also the data that maybe have been collected by others that somehow are also having a big role on the decision. So if I'm Tesla, I can say, okay, it's not my fault. It's the fault of the people that have collected the data set. So I would like to have a comment on.
Well, the comment on your last question, yes, is not easy. So the last 2 points, the Andreas point and the Lamberto's point. Well, I tried to face first Lamberto and leave the last words for Andrea also because probably closer to my real knowledge. Well, I know this, well, I know, not directly. I've heard that today there is a big effort among data scientists in order how to correct the question of Vincenzo, the input data, the data sets in order, or the way of those data are elaborated in order to compensate or to balance against the bias. But and here I'm not sure because I'm quoting something that is more to the scientific field. I've also heard that someone says that, okay, you want a totally unbiased algorithm, it won't be accurate. So the more the algorithm is not biased, the more it is not really reliable as algorithm. I'm not sure if I understood correctly something that I've heard from Samir about this field of study. But so that there is a sort of relation, not linear relation between accuracy and unbiased. And that is it possible, but this is a question for you, for scientists, I'm not able to answer. Is it possible to have a totally unbiased data set? And if it's so fair, so clean, so without any kind of, is it useful to take really accurate decision? I had this discussion in the conference, in one conference with a professor from Stanford, actually, because I'm happy that Stanford now wants to put together AI and humanities, but Stanford is dangerously close to Silicon Valley, to those huge, so people from Stanford, there are people and people in Stanford. So people from, so they are working well, probably. But this other guy, Christopher Yu, is one of the most prominent lawyers, tech lawyer in the United States. When I told him in this debate, well, he made this huge exposition on the possible application of algorithms in the public administration, saying that evidence-based assessments can be used in everything, and they are so powerful and so useful to make decisions, more effective, more accurate, whatever. So I raise up my hand, okay, but what if those decisions, in order to be accurate, they have to be they have to internalize a lot of biases, and so there are some, and he told me, okay, yes, there is a trade-off, something you have to lose. Okay, I said, sorry, but if among this something you have to lose, there is human dignity, principle of equality, I know that are secondary things, but you know. And he told me, no, yes, you are from Europe, I understand you, okay. But the question is a simple trade-off. It's a trade-off. So, do you want accuracy? For example, okay, let's leave aside the judging, sentencing. Okay, in sentencing, we can say that we want to use only totally unbiased algorithms. But let's talk about policing, or policing, as they say in the South. So the activity of police department. So deterrence. So there is a company, it's called Predpol, that uses the same kind of algorithms, but in order to predict the verifications, the happenings of crimes in the quarters of Los Angeles. Los Angeles is the place in which they collected the data crimes since 18th century. So they have huge historical series. So they have this software that says to the policemen that are patrolling, you know, that I make the tour in the quarters, where? I mean, they say tomorrow from 10 to 12 in those 3 blocks, you have 80% of probability that will happen, a rape, 2 theft, and made by black people like this, and they go there. And it's amazing if you see the map of the concentration of crimes is extraordinarily recurrent. There are places in which crimes doesn't happen, places in which, okay, so police goes there. And effectively, the crime rate dropped. So in this case, they said, if we polish all the things and say to our police officers, okay, this is a totally clean algorithm, but we have no accuracy, it's a trade-off. You have less safety, tell to the people what they want. So my point is, I agree with you that probably there are a lot of tools that can do this work, but I'm not sure if we can take together the two. I mean, good accuracy and on the question of the responsibility when when you have a multiple automated decision-making system that so distributes the responsibility among different centers of automated decision-making, this is clearly a big question, lawyers. But here we have the main difference between Europe and the United States. So in the United States, they say, okay, we will have this, Tesla, Elon Musk will say, we will have this problem, we hire some lawyers, good lawyers, we can pay the best of the country, and we try to settle the questions. So they have always a remedial, because they are common lawyers. Here, we tend to have a preventive attitude. We have to regulate. We want to regulate this. And to regulate responsibility is quite more complicated in this case. Last word on Andrea's question. I told about the use of algorithms in public functions, that is, judiciary and administration. Why didn't I talk about private sector? Private sector is huge. Was the first place you told about CEOs, but I can tell you about a bank director that before giving you credit, he uses an algorithm to say if you are insurance company. So here, 2 questions are open. The first one is private powers. It's a very interesting point. So those are private powers. We are equipped to fight against public powers. But how to fight against a private power that paradoxically is closer to the king, closer to the first constitutionalism, is totally a new thing. Technically speaking, GDPR says that any kind of decision-making cannot take. So it could be enforceable also against private. But if you see the exceptions to the rule, the first one is if the automated decision-making is needed by a contract, or second, if you gave your consensus. So as to say, you cannot say no to Facebook to use your data or to Google to use your data to profile you, but you have not to sign the app. You have to go out from the apps. That is practically impossible. So this is the new frontier, how to face this question. My point is that if this is the new constitutional principle of cybernetic era, has to be applied to everyone, not only on the public side. But we have to understand how to cope with the private sector, in which I think is is much more difficult. But my proposal is, let's start with the public. Let's try to put some limitation within the public, so for judges, for lawmakers, and for administrative rulers. And then we also try to face the question of the private sector. So thank you again for your attention. Ciao, ci vediamo dopo.